Well, I wanted to say thank you, Jim, and Healthy Democracy, the panel. Thank you all for allowing me the honor to be with you today, talk about a great project that's going across the nation and in many communities, participatory budgeting. But one of the things I want to talk through the lens today as a former elected official, as well as a professor of political science and a social studies and teen leadership teacher at the high school level. Greensboro is a city of 300,000 individuals. We're a district-based system where we have 5 city elected districts. We have 3 at-large members and the mayor at large. It's called the 5-3-1 system. One of the things that we looked at over 5-6 years ago was how do we get communities of color and the greater community at large more involved into the city's process of how we spend dollars. Most of the times when we talked about budget in Greensboro, we would go into and we had district budget meetings. You know how many people would come to those budget meetings? Maybe 3, maybe 5. And we always wondered, well, what are we doing wrong where we can't get majority of our constituency to come out to learn about the process? And so we had to take a real hard look at the way that we do things in Greensboro. So the community, and they packed our city council chambers month after month, week after week, of the community saying that we need a seat at the table. Because they said, hey, you guys are spending our tax dollars and telling us what you're going to do with it. That's not fair. We need to change this dynamic. We need to be involved throughout the process, and we need to tell you what we want in our communities. If you're not at the seat of the table, you're on the menu. And too long, our communities, whether communities of color, have been on the menu. And if they don't give you a seat at the table, well, you get you a fold-up chair and you make one. That's democracy. And so it's real decisions, real money, real power. What do we do from here? One of the things after we got elected, we got a call from President Obama, and myself and another colleague had to go to the White House with a lot of leaders to talk about participatory budgeting and what we're doing in our communities to make sure that we have people at the table. We went back to the community. We said, hey, we need to do this. We need people at the table. One of the hard things for elected officials is to give up power. And one of the things that we had to do is really take a hard look. Do we really want people to get involved in our public process? And we did. So to start this out, we had to look at our budget. We had a $534 million budget in the city of Greensboro. So we said, hey, you know what? Let's do $500,000, $100,000 each. And that helped, but we needed expertise. And so we worked out with the participatory budgeting project nationally to have them come into our community and craft what we can use in our community. And it cost us about $200,000 to craft the different things that I'm going to share with you today. Greensboro had 4 different goals. The first goal was equity, empowerment, community building, and transparency. To get us through this process, we said, okay, we have $100,000 per district. How are we going to divvy up the projects? How are we going to develop the ideas? How are we going to reach out to the community? Well, all 9 of us on our council got to select 2 people from the community to represent our district, and at-large members, because they were at-large, they were able to select cross districts. And these individuals were the initial steering committee to help us create and draft what our PB process was. So that steering committee that I share with you, those 18 individuals, they created a handbook. And within that handbook, they created roles and responsibilities, how we're going to do the voting, the locations where we're going to have the voting. Community expos is where we use the opportunity to really talk about PB, to educate people, to get them to understand what PB is. And a lot of times, the elected officials we had to do as well, so we fully understand exactly our role and how we can participate. And a lot of times, the voting was at the community centers throughout Greensboro, and it was electronic voting. So we had computers there so you can come in and you can vote. And then we also had paper forms. And we extended the times that we were in these communities to give people an opportunity to come out and vote. A lot of times it's hardworking people, so we had to be flexible on the weekends, after night, to be able to give them an opportunity to come out and vote and tell us how they want their tax dollars to be spent. We had volunteers that helped us. We had many volunteers, and many of those volunteers became the budget delegates that helped us take the ideas in and craft what the proposals were going to be. We had 1,100 residents that voted, 40 volunteer budget delegates, and more than 50 community outreach opportunities. We had 26 winning projects, and a lot of those projects stem from murals on the buildings to some sidewalks in their communities to park benches, chessboards that cost about $50,000 that one community selected that they wanted. Advocates. We saw that students at the college level were really enthused and excited because it was the first time that they felt like they mattered and they cared in their community. So out of the 2,000 people that were involved in Cycle 1, 85% of those individuals were new to the process, had no clue to city budgeting, and were never really involved. One of the things we saw were 18 to 24-year-olds and 25 to 44-year-olds were really the area more respondents that we got response from. Interesting enough, it's like regular elections, you see more women voting, right? Well, in this process, it's no different. More women voted in PB. The only time that we had more males that were involved in the process was as a budget delegate, helping craft and pull together the ideas. When we start looking at education, bachelor's degree and graduate degrees and higher were the education levels. The annual household income were between $10,000 and $74,000. 51% of the respondents were white, and everything else were the different from Asian, Black, African American, Hispanic, or Latino. Interesting enough, when you start looking at Greensboro's demographics as a whole, it's 51% white, and it's 48% minority, 42% Black. So PB was one process for us, okay? Another process was, okay, we go through the PB process, we get you involved, but do you know anything about our budget? Where are our funds? Where do they go? Follow the money. I always tell people that, follow the money. You have to create a simulator so people can understand how much is your city's budget, and then ask them to go in and figure out how do you balance the budget. So you see up here, you have a surplus of $3.1 million. But the idea is for you to balance the budget, and what you do is, in these buckets, you can either take it up or you can take it down, and after this, you submit it, there's a survey information, and in that information, you will let us know these are your priorities. It will come to our budget office, and our budget office will put together all this information for City Council. So when it's time for us to sit down and talk about our budgets, we understand where the community is coming from. This does not negate us from going into the community. Every budget section that we have, we take this simulator out, and we normally get you to take your phones out, put in Balancing Act Greensboro, and we could do a live budget session right now. But that's another piece to PB that we had to create on the front end and back end so you can understand how the process worked. The budget simulator is something awesome to have. If your communities don't, this is an area that you can advocate for your city budget office to create. And then the last piece for us is, once we did these two, we created, just like the steering committee for PB, we chose members from the community to actually serve on this community board process to help us figure out how to divvy up those funds. And this community partners board process works with PB, which uses simulator every time they go out. So The PB process is hugely important to make sure that you have the right voices at the table to be able to get involved and sit down with elected officials. This process takes elected officials figuring out how they can lessen the amount of power that they have to be able to give the opportunity for the community to be at the table. And that was our process in Greensboro. Thank you for the opportunity today, and I'll be around for any questions.